Hello and welcome to Meeting in the Sacred, a podcast where each week we invite you into diverse conversations about physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being in the pursuit of wholeness. My name is Theresa Noach, and I am an interspiritual enthusiast and published author with an eclectic Christian background.
And I am Danielle Chandler, a Christ Path mystic and wholeness coach. No matter where you are in life, if you are curiously seeking, deconstructing, reconstructing, struggling in your faith, or just feeling lost, you are welcome here. You are listening to episode 3, where we begin a 2-part series called The Transformation Process of the Soul. In this episode, Theresa and I are going to share our personal experiences with existential crisis. First, I will share the meaning of existential crisis, and then we will open with a discussion. An existential crisis is an event in someone's life that is expected or unexpected and is typically connected to a life transition. Such events can leave one feeling vulnerable to the unknown, which leads them to question their purpose, life, and identity. Though existential crises often have a negative connotation due to their complex and challenging nature, they offer a space that invites us to grow, mature, and can assist us in living a more authentic life. Theresa, can you share a little bit about what has inspired this series?
You and I have had so many conversations about the different experiences that have led to us really finding each other and us being able to have such great discussions about this process of unraveling or spiritual awakening, or what some call the dark night of the soul. For us, we've talked about how we both have a lot of Christian beliefs that we had to process and work through and even deconstruct to find what feels authentic for this season of our lives. And the experiences that brought on this deconstruction process are these existential crisis moments in our lives. And for me, I can think back to 2017 when I had just had a baby, and I was still homeschooling my daughters who were 10 and 7. And we were 3 years into a home that we just purchased, our first home purchase as a family. And then here comes Hurricane Irma on the map. And, being a Floridian, we're used to hurricanes. We just bunker down, and we get through it. And I didn't expect what happened to happen, but we flooded out of our home and we left that home in suitcases to never return. So not only did we not expect to not be able to go back to our home, but we didn't know what now the future would hold. And so just getting by each day, living all in one room with a friend who opened their home up to us. There's 5 of us now. We had to rehome our dog for a season. And, Joe still had to put on the employee hat and go do his job and do it well, and, kind of compartmentalize everything. And I had to deal with the insurance companies and the demolition. And on top of just trying to figure out what homeschooling looks like, we had no we had no curriculum. We had nothing to work with. And it really was a very strenuous, trying time. It put so much pressure on us individually, and also on our relationship, but on everything else in our lives as well, every other relationship. And at that time, I was serving as a part-time worship leader in the church and a part-time children's director, and I had my hands in a lot of projects. I had just been given the organization Daughters of Naomi. I was ordained into that ministry, and so I had a lot going on in the church. And this pressure cooker type of experience really was like the catalyst. And just when we seem to be seeing the light and then the end of the tunnel, we actually at this point had reconstructed the home. It'd been about 4 months. We're getting ready to move into a new home. We're getting ready to put roots down somewhere else. And by that time it was 2018. It just it didn't end, it wasn't over, and next thing you know is just another slam. We took a job loss, we took a huge income loss, we took even more damage to some other property that we have. Shortly thereafter, I had discovered a cellulitis infection that I had reoccurring, and it got to the point where it was resistant to medication. So, at the same time of dealing with all these other situations, I then went into health crisis. It was the end of 2019. I was starting to feel like I was getting my bearings, and we go into a global shutdown. What I didn't mention before is that the pressure cooker experience, all of these crisis moments, actually led to something we also didn't expect, was that we would be replanting, going to another church. And for us, being planted in a church was really important. That's all we'd ever known. We were raised spiritually that way. We were taught that way since Joe and I decided to be a part of the church community together years ago. And when our pastor moved, we were misplaced then, which was also very tragic for us. He was a huge part of our family's development. So he moved, and we ended up moving to another church, and next thing you know, COVID's happening. So it without even realizing that we were being set up for this dark night of the soul experience, this unraveling of everything that we thought was secure and everything
Mm.
that we stood on. I would have had no way of knowing or predicting that those experiences were going to catapult me into such a deep unveiling, which is really where that unraveling started for me. What about you? What were some of the existential crisis that led you to your unraveling or your dark night of the soul?
I have to give kind of a background in order to lead up to my going through the existential crisis. I was married before, and my first husband, when we met, he and I did not know he had a fetishistic addiction,
Mm.
and we ended up getting married pretty quickly after we had met in discipleship school in Northern California. And by the time we had moved in together in Canada, then these realities started to come to the surface of really what he was dealing with. And I had realized that, I needed to come alongside of him the best I possibly could to support him through some of these challenges. And it came to a point where I had to have an intervention with him. And, he had decided he wanted to go to recovery. And so we ended up moving to British Columbia, where he went to recovery, and I felt that I was supposed to go. And we originally had thought we were going to get married and be missionaries. And that was a
Mm.
really big part of why I chose him. And being in Canada really shifted a lot for me. It was really challenging for me to be there because I had really done a lot of work on myself to heal and prepare myself for what I thought I was going to do with ministry. So after my husband had graduated from his recovery program, we had actually found a church that had a pastor who was also dealing with recovering from sex addiction, and him and his wife at the time really resonated with my husband and I, and we felt like a lot of their core beliefs of what they were introducing to the church really connected and resonated with what we had believed. So we ended up moving to that town and really investing in that space. We were there for about 3 years, and we had gotten really connected with the pastor and his wife in certain ways. And there was kind of this, again, challenge for me of wanting to do my dreams and yet stayed married to my first husband, who was dealing with all of these challenges still after coming out of recovery. And so in the beginning of there was a lot of things that had started surfacing, in the sense that he had started to see certain pastors talking about polyamory, and who he actually looked up to, and there was kind of this shock of like, maybe this is who I'm supposed to be too. But then at the same time, I felt like he was kind of questioning, maybe this is wrong, I don't know. And so I feel like he started to enter into this kind of existential crisis for himself. But right around that time also, our pastor had an affair that came out. My previous husband, his dad had an affair that came out, and his brother-in-law. And so all of these affairs came up within a 2-month period, and it really put him into this shock. I had identified at that time, unfortunately, the recovery center he was at did not teach on relapse prevention. And so there is a lot of skills and tools that he did not actually acquire when he was going through recovery. I felt like there was still this kind of not really like dealing with the root issues of why he was making the choices that he was making. So I had come to this point and I was like, I need to do this for him. And so I stepped into that place, and watching somebody go through depression and go through their own existential crisis, but you're married to them, and their existential crisis has to do with you two being together. um, it's
Mm.
a kind of, it's a really peculiar place. And at that time, I was really secure in myself, and I wasn't at the time focused on the fear of losing him. I was more trying to be in the moment, to be like, what is today going to offer me? And what can I do with what I have? So he actually ended up leaving me in September 2020, 2018. And between February and September, so February was when all the affairs had come out, our church had imploded. I lost all of my community and I lost the reason I was in Canada. And I started to really ask some tough questions. I also had felt, and I know that this is like a really intense idea for many people, but I felt that God had told me in February that year, that we were never meant to worship Jesus. And that put me on a path in what I like to call mainstream modern Christianity. If I were to tell anybody that, they would be like, well, that's blasphemy. Like, what do you mean you're not supposed to worship Jesus? Like, that's what this is all about, Like, that's what we're supposed to do. But I really had felt that God had told me that, and it started to unwind things inside of me, because my heart was like, I was on the worship team for like 8 years. I loved singing, and I saw worship not as just being on a worship team. I saw every moment of your day being worship. The
Yeah.
mundane can be worship. But there was this association with being on the worship team that, in a black and white way, I guess, was like, oh, that's worship.
Yeah.
And this is the stereotypical type of worship. And so what am I supposed to do now? My heart was so like, God, I just want to do the right thing, in the sense that I want to live my best life. And I know you have the best things for me. So if I've been doing anything that doesn't align to that I could make my life better, of course I want to do that. So like, help me understand what the heck that's supposed to mean. Like,
Yeah.
and so it took me about 2.5 years to finally get an understanding of what I heard God say, that we were never meant to worship Jesus. But it also took me 2.5 years to sit with all of these questions that I had, like, what did I do wrong, like, in my marriage? And I couldn't find an answer that was like black and white. Like, I couldn't find like any type of reasoning that could justify why, my husband would have left me and things ended, because I had always thought, like, God is going to work everything out. His love is so amazing, and like God's going to heal my husband, or our marriage is going to be awesome. Like that was how I had thought, even though we were going through all these challenging things, and it came to an end. And it was so, I think, shocking because of that specific time and season that I stepped into, losing so many different things, and then trying to understand, well, what's my life now about? Because I had gone into such darkness. I had felt like I was so alone. And just like you, I was right entering into COVID that this kind of continued on. Even more
Right.
aloneness, even more seclusion, really just kind of feeling trapped in this foreign country I never wanted to be in, feeling like I didn't know how to connect to Christianity because of all of these peculiar things that I started to identify as I looked back at the past and noticed different, like, toxic belief systems that were spoken around me or to me. Even things that I once believed that I could then sit with and be like, wow, that's some really messed up stuff. And not really knowing what was safe, not knowing, where to go or who to turn to. I went into a really dark space, and I never thought I could ever go back into such darkness ever again after experiencing so many amazing God encounters in the past.
I think that there's the experience of a lot of disappointment when our expectations, even if they hadn't been identified as expectations, we don't even know we have them until they're shattered.
Yeah.
And I discovered a book that I actually haven't read yet, which we found the inspiration for this particular title, the soul transformation process. And the author's name is Michael, I want to say Mirdad. It's Mirdad. And his book is called The 5 Stages of the Soul Transformation Process. And why I'm referring to him is because the 5 phases, which I found in his book description as I was researching for the next episode that we're going to do, um, the 5 phases start with dismantling, and then emptiness, disorientation. And those are the first 3 that we're pretty much going to cover in this episode. And after disorientation, it's rebuilding and a new life. And so, as we're talking about the existential crisis that led us into this dismantling, these 3 things, dismantling, emptiness, and disorientation, are kind of like happening all together at the same time. I almost feel like the disorientation for me happened at the same time as the dismantling, which led to this feeling of emptiness, because there comes this point where once you start to see something a certain way, like you had even mentioned, all of these family affairs coming out, and suddenly there's light on a situation that there hadn't been this much light on before. And it's like, once you turn the lights on, you either choose to deny it, or you have to reckon with what you currently see. And
Mhm.
I think for both of us, our crises, our situations, one after another, turned the light on certain areas of our life in such a way that what we had hoped, what we had wanted, what we expected, what we had planned was now never going to be the same. We
Yeah.
were we were never going to be able to unsee what we saw, right?
Mhm.
We were never going to be able to unhear what we heard. You, in your situation, you were never going to be able to unhear what you felt so strongly God had put in your heart about the way you worship God. And for you, you had a strong conviction that God is saying, Jesus is not the center of your worship. And so for you to move into that conviction with authenticity, it was like the light came on in a huge part of your life that now meant you couldn't even engage with the people that you identified with as your community, because for them, that is, that is how they worship. And so It really does. It dismantles. The emptiness was this feeling of losing the security. When the security loss of our home and not knowing where we were going to live next, when the security loss of our income, not knowing if we could pay for where we were going to live next, the security loss of the pastor who, I shared a little bit of my story before. I came to a church community because my life was so screwed up. And so for me, the security was in this church family where I had found a connection to the pastor, and that pastor helped to nurture my marriage back to life. So now the pastor leaves and it's like, well, crap, is our family going to even make it?
Mhm.
Now that we don't have this shepherd, now that we don't have this leadership, this connection, now our church community is splitting. Now we have new leadership. The relationships have all changed. The dynamics, everything has changed. And everything that I found security in has been uprooted. And now there's
Mhm.
this emptiness. What do I hold on to now?
Mhm.
And then, I'm holding on to my faith in Christ. And then the pandemic comes and I watch the church at large struggle in their own faith and think to myself, oh my God, if we can't have faith in these times, what is our faith? And now I'm like, now it's the security of my faith that was shaken. Like, is this even valid? Like, is this even something that can anchor us in the hardest times? So that everything that I thought I had built my life on was now in question. I guess that's where we can make it or break it at that point. And, you were talking about just the feeling of not feeling safe. And I think
Mhm.
when all of your security measures or your plans, right? My security was in my plans, and my plans were unspoken. I didn't know that they were my plans until they weren't possible
Right.
anymore. So after that, it's like, okay, well, now what do we do? How do we move through this dismantling, this emptiness, this disorientation? I think, at this crisis moment, this is where we either choose life or we choose death. This is where we
Mhm.
resort to toxic coping, or we run, or we escape, or we bury our head, or we deny the facts, right? And we can literally uh, perish. We
Mhm.
can physically perish if it's sickness that we're denying, if it's poor life habits, whatever it is. If the denial is so deep, it could literally mean somebody's life, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, or all of the above. So, this is the crossroad right here where we have to decide how we're going to move through this, how we're going to get through this crisis and get to the part of our lives where we can actually feel safe again, or we can begin to reconstruct. But so we're still here. We're still sitting in this mess. We're still sitting in this emptiness. Now what?
Mhm. I think, with so much loss, when you feel everything that you've built your life on is being shaken, there is this great sense of mourning. And usually in the environments I've been in our society as well as church, we haven't actually been educated or given the awareness that we need to even be able to identify that with so much loss, it really is mourning, and
Yeah.
how do we walk out mourning in a way that you're able to be curious, and you're able to walk in wholeness with these seasons in our lives, these three terms that you even mentioned that are associated to the series that we're doing, this is dismantling, the emptiness, the disorientation. These experiences happen to everyone.
Hmm.
And there is this ability to be able to enter in as though that life is giving us a gift. And I know when you're in it, it really does not feel that way at all. um, but through my experience, I felt as though I was this vessel that I called it like a coconut shell. And as though like somebody had literally scraped out all the meat, of the coconut, and all that was left was shell. And
Yeah.
I felt like I had no idea who I was anymore. I had no idea what I believed. I felt like I had no community. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I felt empty. It was so dark and so hopeless. but somewhere in me, I knew, and this was my choice, but I knew I had to hold on to some kind of hope, even if that hope was as small as a grain of sand, because there was something in me that just it knew. It's like it's hard to explain, but it knew it had to choose that. I feel because I had that, um, that was a seed, and over the course of 2 years, it was able to grow. I had to come to this place of not knowing answers to the questions I was asking and being content
Mm.
with not knowing. Sitting with such uncertainty and such unknown when you're already feeling vulnerable to uncertainty, um, I feel like there is this oneness. And I kept seeing the illustration of the caterpillar that goes into this space somewhere in its DNA. It has been wired and programmed to know it's going to go into a cocoon at a very specific time. It's going to weave itself alone into a cocoon where it's going to be dark, all alone inside of this little like nest that is fragile. And inside the cocoon, the caterpillar transforms into a liquid substance.
That is
And then,
wild.
yeah, and then from that becomes this butterfly. And it has to actually gain the strength to poke its wing out of the cocoon on its own so that it can survive. I've heard that, if someone comes along and tries to help it, like a human, to try to help it get out of its cocoon, it'll actually die because it didn't learn the muscle memory or gain the strength physically that it needed, maybe even the critical thinking skills, to get out of the cocoon. And I kept seeing that as myself and my experience. This is a being a reborn experience. This is,
Yeah.
I am rebirthing, and it felt like hell. And there was no, when I say I had like a grain of hope, I was not positive. Luckily, I have been seeing a counselor since my first marriage. This counselor was actually my marriage counselor at the time and has continued to counsel with me. And so he's seen my journey and has been really helpful. But he was like, I promise you, it's going to be okay. And that was like the
Mm.
worst thing for me. I did not want to hear that. I'm like, I don't know if I can believe that. But something again inside of me held on to that. And it again was like a seed that started to grow. And I could only see the growth through time though, because it was once I started to reconstruct or feel that healing was taking place and my heart was ready and I was choosing to move forward and to redeveloping what I guess you could say looks like health to me.
Mhm.
That's when I started to see that statement manifest.
That is so beautiful. I just love the way you said that because even as a parent, it helps me to remember that when my children are struggling or hurting or going through their metamorphosis, and we go through a few metamorphoses in our lives, and one of them is through the teenage years, and through puberty, and it's hard to see your teenagers struggle to find an identity, and I struggle to want to keep them from hurting. And the truth is, you can't help them get out of the cocoon because you could rob them of what it is that they're supposed to learn in this
Mhm.
growing and developmental stage. I guess we're more like the stem or the branch that basically just supports their cocoon, and we give them that foundation and that sturdiness. But that was such a beautiful analysis. And I have to say, it's so graceful and so beautiful. And I'm sure that it didn't always feel that way, but I was really messy. I was offended like nobody's business. I was mad at everything and everyone. I was I was bitter, and I didn't even realize how bitter I was until probably about a year later when I started to heal from some of the bitterness.
Mm,
I didn't really even know it was there. There were situations that had occurred, especially in the church community, where it felt as if I was not allowed to be anything other than what I had been for the church, the person that I was, the things that I taught, the things that I believed, the way I carried myself, the way I conducted worship music. It was like, you're established now, you're an image, and this is what
mm,
they want. This is what they want you to produce, to continue to keep everything copacetic, even within the church. And so when I started moving through some of my own questions that I needed to have answered about theology and doctrine and my own place in the world when it comes to Christianity, and my own place in my home, my own place in ministry, and honestly, my own place with God, because I still had so much insecurity about whether or not I was even secure with God. So, about a year or so after I had become unchurched and really started pressing into this place of listening in the quiet place and really listening and being led and guided in the dark by my heart, not by what I could see and hear on the outside of my experiences. I was led into a time of being able to see other people as myself and myself as other people. Being able to have compassion for the people that had participated in my process by whatever means it was, whether it was a personality conflict, whether it was a disagreement, whether it was, we don't see eye to eye on theology, whether it was we couldn't come to an agreement on my job description in the church anymore, whether it was I didn't feel supported by my husband at the time, whatever it was, or even appreciated by the people that I worked for. And then on top of that, just doubting my own capacity as a mother, doubting my own capacity to be able to be what I felt my children needed for me. So I was really just kind of annoyed with all of this. And so when spirit started to lead me deeper into myself, deeper into my core, deeper into my fears. It was for me having to face my fears, having to face buried, suppressed emotions from childhood experiences. And it was like I was being brought into the cocoon to truly go through this purification process, which was really painful because it meant that I had to see the things that I had buried, the fears that I buried behind my boldness, the insecurities that I buried behind my courage, the pain of abandonment and rejection that I had buried behind my confidence that I presented. I was really getting what I asked for. Honestly, I believe that we come into this incarnation, as I talked about this in our previous episode, we come into this incarnation with an assignment or a blueprint, so to speak. And we do have to choose to cooperate with it for the fulfillment of that. And I believe that we do get to choose the degree of which we fulfill it. Is it going to be spectacular, or is it going to be, okay, it's good enough? We get to choose to what degree we want to create that thing that we come here to create, or whether or not we want to completely forfeit that process. But I believe that my soul had said yes to this process. I believe that my soul said yes to everything that the divine, that the creator wanted for my existence. And I believe that my soul's yes trumps my flesh's no
mm,
most of the time. I talked about that before too. And so I remember having this night of worship at the church, and it was kind of a spontaneous night of worship, where we were just going off of a couple of chord progressions and going off the cuff. And I used to love those. I used to love just the free flow. And so this particular night, probably a couple of months before this complete dismantling of the church as I knew it, we were singing off the cuff, "We say yes. We say yes." And I remember thinking to myself as I was shouting, "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. I say yes." I remember thinking on a deeper level, what in the world did I just say yes to? Like, I remember looking around at the stage and everybody is jumping up and down, joyously singing, "We said yes." And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, boy, whoa, boy, like it's about to go down. Like I knew, I, I knew at that point that saying yes to the divine plan was not going to be a cakewalk. And here I was, under the anointing of this beautiful worship. I'm jumping up and down. We're all celebrating, yes, but I knew in that moment it was almost like a, oh crap. I just
Mhm.
enlisted. I totally just enlisted in something and there is no turning back. And I look back at that now and remember that night so powerfully because this this 5-year season happened right after, and I'm so grateful for it. But there were a couple times that it was so dark. I didn't know if I really didn't know if we were going to come out sane. And I mean, we, as in my marriage, my children, I didn't know if we were going to get through this with our sanity or even with our family intact or even my
Mhm.
health. So it was really intense. But when I started being led to see everyone else, to see myself in them and to see them in me, there's this phrase and it's in Lakesh. I am you and you are me. I was able to start forgiving and loving others regardless of how they treated me because I also was able to forgive myself regardless of how I had treated myself. And because I knew God's grace so deeply, which I think is what I kind of liken that to that little seed that you had,
Mhm.
this deep seed of grace. And it's like I knew that grace so deeply. Um, and, it takes practice, it takes meditation, it takes prayer to work through the painful energy of rejection. And like you said, even a counselor, we have to work through the rejection, we have to work through the abandonment. But releasing people with genuine compassion and love, I believe, is a sure sign of progressing in our spiritual growth. And I
Mhm.
used I used to look around and think, um, what's missing or what do I need to improve? Like I would think, the church needs this and the church needs that, or the community needs this or the community needs that. And I realized that I was seeing the world through a lack mindset, from a victim mentality. So I started to look around and not focus on what wasn't done. So I stopped being upset with the church. I stopped thinking that the church is lacking this and the church is lacking that. While I choose to be unchurched at this time in a formal sense or setting, I no longer look at the church as in it's the culprit or there's something wrong with it. Although every community has its flaws, but now I focus on what is done and what is good. Everything shifts energetically when we find gratitude for anything, and this is where, for me, the expansion and the healing really started to take place. So
Mhm.
now, to continue processing through it, I focus on what I have to offer. And I trust that the gaps are filled by God, by the sacred. And in due time, we will experience that in this tangible realm. But like you even said, there was just this place where you came to terms with, I'm not going to have all my questions answered. And there's a huge liberation in that mindset of being able to trust the divine, being able to trust the sacred to handle um, the things that are beyond our comprehension at this time or the things that are out of our control. And that also is maturity. It's
Mhm.
maturity to be able to say, I know my lane. I know what I am equipped for at this moment. And I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And even what I know is subject to change. And that is okay. I can trust God's love. I can trust God's love so much to meet me in everything that I don't know,
Mhm.
to meet me in my questions, even if I don't get them answered, to meet me in that place where I can truly say, you know what? No, I don't know what I believe about that Bible verse. I don't know what I believe about that description of Christ. I don't know anymore what I believe about heaven or hell. And I'm just shooting from the cuff right now, from the hip, you know?
No,
Um,
it's good though, and
yeah.
it's true. I think, like, when we're in times of reflection, which some people do daily, some people, do weekly or monthly or yearly. Regardless, when you are sitting in those times of reflection, I think something that's really important to sit with is looking at your whole story, because we can oftentimes get so focused on the details that we forget where we've come from.
Sure.
And I think history, doing this with history in general, as a society, as the world, it's also really important, to become empathetic, become compassionate, become humbled, become aware. There's these different things that we can connect the dots to. Our journeys, they get us, from the past to the now and then into the future. So coming into something like an existential crisis, for instance, and, reviewing both of our stories, I think that you can see that there are some silver threads that, resemble these stages of existential crisis between both of our stories. And you go through these years in the past, and you pray, and you have hopes, and you have dreams, and you have these moldings and shapings. And I like to say, the tectonic plates of our heart are shifting, and, volcanic lava comes up,
Mm.
and there's mountains that form. And, even though there's these pains and these things that are peculiar that draw curiosity, this beautiful terrain is actually being developed. And when you get into these spaces of what some people call the dark night of the soul, and you can lose sight of the past, or sometimes you're stuck in the past because you're trying to make sense of the now, because it you are the past and you are the now. like
So true.
like you carry every moment of every part of your life with you wherever you're going. So there are these impressions from the past that are in you, and they do impact you. And yes, you are in this now moment, and it is a gift. The past doesn't have to define you, but you get this opportunity in this now moment to make choices and to be with yourself in that curious state of wonder. Learn how to put words to things that maybe you never knew how. I remember going through some of my processes and realizing I don't have words for my emotions. I was very limited in being able to understand what I was feeling. Only having, like, the basic words for emotions: happy, sad,
Right.
frustrated, and I started to branch out. And that helped me to feel more confident and to have the understanding that made things feel like there was a calm, because I wasn't in a place of such confusion anymore. It was like, oh my gosh, now I have this understanding. Now I can do something with this. And that to me is a connection with the soul that is a part of our wholeness journey, where it's like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I'm experiencing. And it does ignite this kind of abundant life feeling, this joy, this like connection to self that I think helps us along our path. It doesn't mean that all of our pain is going to be gone. I think, you know, when we are able to visit places of curiosity within us, it can only lead to growth. And like you were kind of saying with your kids, or with, having children, like, we are all children, and we
Yeah.
are all we are all in this life trying to work things out and gain understanding. And You had said some really great things about confronting beliefs during childhood. It's like until we're living in a moment, we don't fully know what's living and breathing inside of us. And it is an opportunity if we want it to be to gain the awareness to be like, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? And sitting with that space so
Yeah.
that there can be a relationship, because I think that's where people can feel empowered. And it's like, oh, I going back to the emotions that I was sharing, it's like, oh, I didn't know what I was feeling. Like not knowing, any type of not knowing is going to be a sensation of confusion. And confusion can build anxiety or depression,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that's a really simple way for people to start to feel empowered, and especially these confusing times of existential crisis where you might really feel alone and you don't know who to talk to or where to go or who to turn to, because maybe you have lost your community like I did.
Right.
And maybe all you really do have is yourself and talking to God or spirit. And, that I feel like holds a lot of treasure. Unless we are inspired to walk out something like being curious, we're not going to know to do it.
Yeah, and I know we have to wrap this up soon, and one of the things that just came to my mind is that some of our listeners, they have not come to the point in their life where they can say that they believe in a god, or they
Hmm.
believe in a savior, or they believe in a universal consciousness that is lovingly pursuing their highest development and well-being. And they might just be listening out of curiosity. They might be on the path of trying to discover what spirituality means for them. And it's hard for me, as someone who grew up in spirituality and in Christianity, to often put myself in someone else's shoes who may have never ever had been introduced to experiencing spirituality, God, or faith. And I know for some people it's really hard to connect with a spiritual identity. And some people connect within themselves, and they call this their higher power, or they call this their highest self. And so I just wanted to say that wherever our listeners are at right now, if you are in a place that is dark and lonely and confusing, and you maybe think to yourself, well, these other people have some hope in God, but I can't bring myself to believe in anything outside of this existence. I would just say maybe you could um, find it within you to imagine, use your imagination and believe that there is a divine loving power available to you that you have not experienced yet. If you can at least start with that mustard seed right there, that there is more. That's it. There is more. And whatever it is available to you. It is available to you inside of you.
Hmm.
And if you can choose to ponder on that and even give it the slightest bit of, okay, maybe that's true. If you could even find it within yourself to believe just a fraction of that, that it might be possible, that there is still more for you, that's called hope. And if you can hold on to that hope, whether or not you believe in God or Jesus or a God or anything, if you could hold on to that hope that there is still more, there is more. I promise you, there is more, and that there are better days ahead, and that you can move through this. And I know, Danielle, you were going to also share some resources for people that might be struggling, and maybe some final thoughts.
And that's really connected to what I had sensed the "we were never meant to worship Jesus" statement was actually about, is that there is divine love that has been placed within each one of us, and it is
Mm,
believing in what has been placed within us and living from that place, knowing that we are amazing and that we do have the resources inside of us
that's good.
that we need. So I really appreciate that you shared that. And
Yeah.
if anybody that's listening is going through a time where they are experiencing emotions that feel like they're consuming their life due to going through an existential crisis, if you're dealing with challenges in your mental health and you feel like you're being impacted on a deep level, if you're having any type of suicidal thoughts, please consider reaching out to the free crisis support services that are available 24 hours a week. Sorry, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can text START, that's capital START, to 741-741, or you can call, text the 988 Lifeline to talk to trained counselors for free. All you have to do is dial 988. And there are also people who specialize in existential crisis therapy. They're called existential therapists. So if that's something that you feel you would like to research, please do so to support your journey. We will also be listing these support contacts on our podcast website. And if you'd like to get in touch with Theresa or I, you can reach us at mediumsacred.com. And if you'd like to connect with us individually, our personal contacts will be listed on our website. We so appreciate that you were willing to join us today and listen to our stories. Until next time.